few years ago, when I was a young boy, I recalled a story about how growing up in Pasadena, Texas, in a neighborhood, a residential neighborhood where there's just house after house after house, my friends and I would get together often, whether it was on big wheels or little bicycles or whatever. Maybe you can remember times like that. Does anybody remember the big wheel? Do they still make them? That was my favorite. I don't know if I owned one or if I borrowed one because I couldn't afford one, but the big wheel was the coveted item of the time. But on this particular day, as I recall, and this story I'm going to do the best I can. It may not be completely accurate if I'm not recalling it right, but again, a bunch of us got together and we had our bikes and big wheels and everything, and we'd caravan down the street on sidewalks on a mission to do whatever. But on this particular time, we were heading down to John Price's house, and John was a little blonde-haired kid, and he lived about 8 or 9 houses down. And so I think I was on my bike. I had to have been to be part of this story, but we're heading down this street to John Price's house, down the sidewalk, and there's something about John Price's house that you need to know. He had a dog, a terrier, as I recall, a really mean terrier. He was a terrier, and his name was Scruffy. And any time before I entered this house, I wanted to know that dog was was restrained behind a door or a room or something. They let him in the house, just run around, and of course he was real friendly. He was two-faced. He was real friendly to them, but he had something on me. And so we all went inside, and maybe we were having some refreshments or whatever, but somehow that dog got loose. And he headed for me, and I headed for the door. And I jumped on my bike, and this is 8 or 9 houses down the street. That dog took off after me, and I left the door open, and so it took off out of the house for the first time ever that I can recall. That dog was free. And so I'm heading home, and I'm heading down that sidewalk as fast as I can, and that terrier is nipping at me all the way, and he's barking and growling and doing his thing that's always terrorized me. He was at his classic best that day. And I made it to my yard, and I threw the bike down and ran in, and you have to stop and open the door and all those things. And I got my door open, but I left my door open as I went into the house. And so Scruffy proceeded to go in our house. And Susan in the Miller home, it's real often for a bunch of us brothers and sisters to be laid up watching Gilligan's Island or Leave It to Beaver or something. And I don't know what y'all were thinking when I ran in there with Scruffy on my tail. But Scruffy followed me into our house, and I went up our stairs, and somewhere in there, he got a piece of me on the rear. And then I went into the room that I was sleeping in at that time. We changed rooms a lot, but at that particular time we had 2 sets of bunk beds, 4 of us sleeping in one bedroom, and I just remembered leaping onto the bunk bed. I didn't touch anything. I mean, I just jumped on top of it, and as I was looking out from the bunk bed, it was just seeing that thing, jumping and barking and snapping at me. And John Price finally made it up there later and got him by the collar and calmed him down and carried him out. That dog scared me to death. Scruffy, I just wonder how he made it through the years. But we heard an illustration at an elders conference a few weekends ago, similar to this. And the gentleman drew an illustration to the way that God removed Saul as king of Israel because he was disobedient and he was impatient and he was selfish. And he replaced him with somebody after his own heart. And I've always loved that passage, and we want to identify with David, the man after God's own heart. And I've always felt that the primary definition of being after a person's heart is defined. For instance, in Acts chapter 13 and verse 22, it says, after removing Saul, he made David their king. He testified concerning him, I have found David, son of Jesse, a man after my own heart. Well, what does that mean? Well, it says, he will do everything I want him to do. And so obviously, being a man after God's own heart means that a person will do everything God wants him to do. That's what it says, that's what it means. But it's a little bit different way of describing it when you say he's a man after God's own heart. Now, back to Scruffy. He was after me. And he was after me from where he resided all the way to where I resided. And he was after me all along the way. And you can think about all the things that got in his way. You know, the slipping on the tile at that house and banging his body maybe on the door, getting out, and running all the way down the sidewalk and maybe catching a clip of the grass here and there, and maybe having to jump over my bicycle that I laid down, maybe slamming his head up against the door that I had opened up into my house, and maybe slipping on the tile in our house and running up the stairs and trying to get a piece of me and then falling back and then running into that bedroom, and maybe he ran into the side of the bed. I can't tell you what he was doing. I never looked. But he was after me the whole time. And that's the way life is. You know, Scruffy encountered all kinds of challenges and problems, but he stayed after me. And this man, give him the credit, who came up with this illustration. That's the way a person is after God. We encounter these problems and setbacks in life, but we stay after God. We stay after him and stay after him. And we keep going back to the Bible. We keep asking for forgiveness. We keep trying to make things right with people the way David did, the glaring mistakes that he made, and he kept going back to God, and that's why he was a man after his own heart. So I appreciate the illustration that's been given me, and hopefully it's a good illustration to all of us to be after God, just continually after him. No matter what kind of setbacks we have, we stay after him. And that's the way we're a man or a woman after God's own heart. If there's anyone here who feels they maybe haven't been pursuing God and been after his heart, this would be a great time for us to get together and pray about that and help and encourage you. Or if there's anybody here who has not obeyed the gospel and in baptism and become a child of God, this would be a great time to do that as we stand and sing.